I swear, the night it happened started off so stupidly normal that if you'd told me what was coming, I would have laughed in your face. Nothing dramatic, nothing wild. Just me, my best friend Evan, and a broken AC unit that had been taunting us all summer. Evan and I had been best friends since freshman year of college, 6 years now. He was the kind of guy who made everyone feel comfortable. Soft brown eyes, that crooked smile he flashed when he was trying not to laugh, and hair that always fell into his face no matter how many times he pushed it back. We'd always been close, but in a way that felt predictable, safe. Like nothing between us could ever really change, or so I thought. That night the heat was unbearable. My apartment's AC had finally given up on life earlier that afternoon, blowing its last breath of lukewarm misery before falling silent forever. We tried everything. Ice packs, cold showers, sitting on the floor like dying animals. Finally, around midnight, Evan groaned and said, "Dude, I'm serious. I can't sleep on your couch tonight. I'll melt." I laughed. "You think my bed is any cooler?" "Yeah," he said, smirking, "but your room has the window that actually opens." He wasn't wrong. And honestly, I didn't want him dying of heat stroke on my watch. So I shrugged, pretending this was completely casual, totally normal. "Fine, we can share. Just don't hog the fan." He snorted. "You mean the fan that barely blows harder than a depressed hamster?" But he still followed me into the room. We didn't make anything of it. We never had. We'd shared worse. Tents while camping, tiny hostel beds on road trips. Even a hammock once when circumstances got questionable. Nothing ever happened. Nothing ever almost happened. So why did this feel different? We lay on opposite sides of my bed, facing away from each other, the little fan making its pathetic circular arc at our feet. The open window let in the faintest breeze. Just enough to pretend we weren't slowly cooking. "Dude," Evan mumbled into his pillow after a few minutes, "your bed feels like a preheated oven." "Should we just go sleep in the fridge?" I asked. He laughed, low and warm. It rolled through me in a way I tried to ignore. Eventually, the heat got to me. I kicked off the blanket, shifted, twisted, flipped my pillow, flipped it back. Evan wasn't doing much better. I could tell by the way he kept sighing dramatically, like he wanted me to comment. "Dude," he finally said, "can I, move closer to the window? It's slightly cooler." "Go for it," I muttered, not even looking. But he didn't climb over me. He slid closer. Toward me, not the window. I felt the mattress dip, felt his body radiating heat, felt him settle just behind me, with a long exhale. Not touching. Just close enough that the air between us felt different. I should have asked him what he was doing. Should have said something to break the weird tension creeping in. But I didn't. Something about the quiet made me stay still, listening to the rhythm of his breath. Minutes passed. Maybe more. I must have drifted because the next thing I remember is waking up to the softest pressure on my back. Not a push. Just contact, like he'd shifted in his sleep. At least, that's what I thought until I became fully awake. It wasn't just his hand. It was his whole body, warm and slow breathing, pressed lightly against me. His chest against my back, his leg brushing mine. His forehead near the nape of my neck, his breath warm on my skin. This had never happened before. I tried to stay still, to convince myself it was an accident, but my pulse was hammering. Then, out of nowhere, I felt it. His arms sliding across the sheet, fingertips brushing my waist. Hesitant. Testing. Like he wasn't asleep at all. My breath caught in my throat. And then he did it again. This time his hand didn't stop at my waist. It reached for me. Slow, careful, deliberate. Resting lightly on my stomach. His fingers curling just slightly, like he was waiting to see if I'd pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I felt him freeze behind me, like he'd been holding his breath too. It was the first moment in 6 years where I realized something was happening. Something real. Something that felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing if there was ground below. I barely whispered, "Evan?" He didn't move his hand. Didn't pull it back. Didn't pretend he was asleep. Instead, his voice brushed the back of my neck, softer than I'd ever heard it. "Yeah," he said. "I'm awake." My heart slammed into my ribs. Before I could say anything, before I could even breathe, he whispered, "I'm sorry. I just couldn't not reach for you." For a second, everything in me stopped. My breath, my thoughts, even the heat in that damn room. I didn't move. I didn't even know how to move. Evan's hand was still on my stomach, warm and tentative, like he wasn't sure if he had just ruined everything or started something neither of us was ready to name. When I didn't pull away, he shifted just barely, like an inch, maybe less, but enough for me to feel his chest press more firmly against my back. Enough to feel his heartbeat, steady at first, then picking up speed almost in sync with mine. "You," my voice cracked embarrassingly. "You couldn't what?" He exhaled, and I felt the warm breath hit my neck. "I couldn't not touch you," he murmured. "I've been trying to ignore this for months, man." My pulse hammered. Months? My best friend? This Evan, quiet, careful, easygoing Evan, had been holding something like this in for months? I swallowed hard. "But why tonight?" He hesitated. "Because you looked so—" He cut himself off. "I don't know. Comfortable. Close. And the heat? I don't know. It made everything feel—" He made a frustrated sound. "Fuck, I'm messing this up." My hand moved before my brain caught up. I covered his, the one resting on my stomach, fingers sliding between his, like the movement had been waiting years to happen. "You're not messing anything up," I whispered. He went still again, then let out a shaky breath, almost like he'd been holding it in for years. I turned slightly so I could see him out of the corner of my eye. His face was half shadow, half moonlight, but I could see the way his jaw tensed, how his eyes flicked down to where our hands touched. "I didn't think you'd be okay with this," he said quietly. "I didn't think you would ever do something like this," I shot back instantly, the whisper fierce, honest. "You're the one who's always been so straight, so sure of everything." Evan gave a humorless little laugh. "Yeah, well, turns out I'm not as straightforward as I thought." He shifted again, and his forehead brushed the back of my shoulder. Light, soft, careful. Like he was still afraid to cross a line, even after he already had. "Tell me to stop," he said suddenly, not pleading, not desperate, just offering, giving me a door out. "I don't want you to stop," I said. "I don't think I've ever wanted you to stop." His grip on me tightened, not rough, but firm, like he needed contact to believe I was real. The air between us thickened. The hum of the fan faded into the background. I felt his chest rise and fall faster now, his breath catching slightly each time it hit my neck. I turned further until we were face to face on the pillow, inches apart. His eyes searched mine, flicking back and forth as if reading every thought in my head, every fear, every want. "You sure?" he whispered. "I'm sure." Slowly. So slowly I thought I might lose my mind. Evan lifted his hand from my stomach and let it trace a warm line up my side, stopping at my chest. I felt his fingertips tremble as they rested there, like he wasn't fully convinced any of this was happening. Then he whispered, "Can I get closer?" I didn't answer with words this time. I slid my arm around him and pulled him toward me. The movement was small, but the effect was immediate. His body fit against mine like it had been, trying to find its way there for years. His forehead rested against mine, our noses brushing, our breaths mingling in a way that felt intimate, in a way nothing with him ever had before. He whispered my name, like it was something fragile. I whispered his back, like it was something I'd been holding inside too long. For a long moment we just lay there, breathing the same air, every tiny touch feeling like a spark. And then he leaned in just a little, his lips brushing the corner of my mouth. Not a kiss, not yet, just a test, a question, a plea. I didn't pull away, neither did he. "Evan," I whispered. His reply was a soft, trembling, "Yeah?" I didn't get to say anything else, because right then he finally closed the distance, and everything between us shifted. Forever. The first real kiss wasn't dramatic. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't some explosive movie moment. It was soft, careful, almost scared. Like Evan was afraid he'd imagine my answer, afraid that if he pushed too far, too fast, the whole moment would slip through his fingers. Our lips brushed, light, barely there, but it still felt like every nerve in my body woke up at once. He pulled back a fraction of an inch, just enough that our breaths mixed again. "You okay?" he whispered. I nodded, but the movement was tiny, almost invisible. "Yeah, are you?" He let out a shaky laugh. "Not even close." We were still nose to nose, our legs tangled slightly under the sheet, the slow hum of the fan stirring the warm air around us. I could feel the heat of his body against mine, but now it wasn't uncomfortable. Now it felt grounding. I reached up and brushed a strand of hair off his forehead, something I'd done 100 times in friendly, teasing ways. But this time it made his breath hitch, like the touch meant something now. "Evan?" I whispered again, because his name suddenly felt different in my mouth. More important, more intimate. He shut his eyes for a second, like the sound of it was too much. Then he kissed me again, this time with intention. Still slow, still tender, but deeper. His hand came up to rest on my jaw, his thumb brushing my cheekbone. I felt him melt into the kiss, like he'd been holding himself back for so long that letting go felt like exhaling after years underwater. When we finally pulled apart, foreheads pressed together, he murmured, "I've wanted to do that for way longer than I ever wanted to admit." I blinked at him in disbelief. "Evan, you've never even looked at a guy before." He laughed softly, fingers still touching my face. "Yeah, I know, trust me, it freaked me out too." I swallowed, my heart pounding. "So when did you start feeling?" "Honestly," he interrupted gently, "probably way earlier than I should have." He shifted onto his back, staring up at the ceiling, but he kept my hand in his, thumb tracing slow circles against my skin. "Remember when I helped you move into this place? And we accidentally dropped your mattress on my foot?" I laughed. "Yeah, you swore so loudly that my neighbor thought we were fighting." "Yeah, well," he said, giving me a sheepish grin. "That night, after we finally set everything up and you fell asleep on the couch, I remember sitting there, looking at you and thinking something felt different. I tried to shake it off. Told myself I was tired, told myself it was nothing." He paused. "But it didn't go away." My chest tightened. "You never told me." "I know, because I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't even know what it was. I kept trying to convince myself I was straight, that I was misreading things, that I was just close to you. But every time you touched me, like even something dumb, like handing me the remote, it felt like a shock. I didn't say anything. I just listened, my thumb tracing the back of his hand now. And tonight," he continued quietly, "when I got in bed with you, something just broke. In a good way, I think. I don't know." He let out a breathy laugh. "God, I'm really rambling, aren't I?" "No," I said softly, "you're not." Evan turned his head, looking at me again. His eyes were warm, nervous, searching. I didn't plan any of this. I didn't even mean to fall asleep so close to you. But then you shifted, and your back was right there, and I just reached for you without thinking. And you scared the hell out of me." I teased gently. He flushed. "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said immediately. "I'm glad you did." His shoulders loosened, relief softening the tension in his posture. "Yeah? Yeah." He looked down at our hands intertwined, like he was still making sure it was real. Then he scooted closer again until our sides were touching, warm and steady and comfortable in a way that felt new but familiar all at once. For a few minutes, we just lay there in quiet, the kind of quiet that felt safe, like something had shifted into place between us. Then he spoke again, voice low. "What happens now?" I let out a small breath. "I don't know." He smiled faintly. "Me neither." But he didn't look scared. Not anymore. More like he was curious, hopeful, even if he didn't want to show it. He pulled me gently until my head rested on his shoulder, his fingers brushing my arm in slow, absent-minded lines. His breathing steadied. Mine did too. And in the warm mess of that tiny bedroom, with the fan barely working and the air thick with leftover heat, one thing settled between us with quiet certainty. This wasn't an accident. And it wasn't going away. Not after tonight. Not after that kiss. Not after the way he'd reached for me like he'd been holding it in forever. I didn't fall asleep right away. I don't think either of us did. Being wrapped against Evan like that felt too new, too strange, too good for sleep to come easily. My head rested on his shoulder, his arm around me in this absent-minded but secure kind of way, like he wasn't even thinking about it anymore. His fingertips traced slow patterns on my upper arm, small, gentle movements that made my chest tighten every time he restarted the loop. His breathing had steadied, though not deep enough to be sleep, but calm, more peaceful than he'd looked all day, honestly. Every so often he exhaled softly, and each warm breath brushed the side of my forehead, making something in me twist. I finally whispered, "You still awake?" He hummed. "Yeah." "You stopped talking. You looked like you were falling asleep," he murmured. "I wasn't," he chuckled quietly. I could tell. We shifted slightly, my arm sliding across his chest as I got comfortable. His body tensed for a split second, like he wasn't expecting the contact, then relaxed again, melting into the space between us. It was still hot in the room, still sticky and uncomfortable, but for the first time that night, I didn't care. There were 1,000 questions spinning in my mind. What this meant, how long he'd felt like this, what would happen in the morning, but they all felt heavy, too heavy for the strange softness settling over both of us. So instead, I said the one thing I'd been replaying in my head for the past hour. "I can't believe you kissed me." He let out a slow, almost embarrassed laugh. "Yeah, honestly, I can't either." "Do you regret it?" I asked before I could stop myself. His fingers froze against my arm, then started tracing again. Slower this time. "No," he said quietly. "Not even a little." The answer sank into me like warmth. "Do you?" he asked after a beat, sounding smaller than usual. Vulnerable. "No," I breathed. "I don't." He exhaled, almost like he'd been waiting for that exact answer to unclench a knot in his chest. Then he lifted his head just enough to look at me. His eyes were half-lidded, soft in the dim light from the window. "Good," he murmured. He brushed a thumb along my jaw, tentative but sure enough that I felt the intention behind it. His gaze drifted to my lips. I didn't move, didn't say anything, I just waited. He leaned in and kissed me again. This kiss was different from the others. There was something more confident in it, more certain. His hand slid behind my neck, fingers threading into my hair as he pulled me closer. I felt myself respond instinctively, leaning into him, my breath catching as our lips moved together in a way that felt unhurried but full of something neither of us could name yet. When he finally pulled back, he smiled, like really smiled, the kind that pushed into his cheeks and made his eyes crease at the corners. I'd seen it 1,000 times, but never like this, never directed at me like this. "You have no idea how long I wanted to do that," he whispered. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You're seriously going to have to start explaining things at some point." He rubbed the back of his neck with his free hand. "Yeah, I know." He glanced at the ceiling. "It's just hard to talk about." "Try," I said gently. He let out a slow breath. "Okay." And after a pause, "I think I knew I liked you the night you had that shitty date." I blinked. "Which one?" "I've had a lot of shitty dates." He snorted. "The one where the guy made you pay for both of you and then told you he wasn't looking for anything serious." "Oh," I grimaced. "That guy. You came home pissed and sad and I don't know. I remember feeling angry at him for making you feel like that, but not in a normal best friend kind of way. It felt bigger than that. Messier." He paused. "And then you sat next to me on the couch and put your head on my shoulder, remember?" "Yeah. Well," he said, scratching nervously at his chest with his free hand. "I remember thinking, I could get used to this, and then freaking out about thinking that." I stared at him, stunned. "You never said anything." "Of course I didn't." He rolled his eyes lightly. "I thought I was losing my mind. You're my best friend. I didn't want to mess that up. I didn't want to confuse you or push you away." "And now?" I asked. He looked at me again, eyes steady. "Now I'm realizing I've been messing things up by not telling you." We both went quiet again. Not awkward quiet, just full, heavy, Real. After a moment, he pulled me closer, our foreheads brushing. "I'm still scared," he murmured. "Me too," I admitted. But his thumb stroked my cheek. "I don't want to stop." "Good," I whispered. "Because I don't either." Evan's breath hitched softly. And for the first time since he reached for me in the dark, the fear in his expression faded into something else. Want. Real, undeniable want. And I felt it too. Everywhere. The moment Evan's expression shifted, when the fear gave way to something deeper, heavier, unmistakable, I felt everything inside me flip. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with music swelling or lightning striking or any of those movie cliches. It was quiet, small, almost shy. But it was real. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time and recognizing something he'd been trying not to acknowledge for too long. His thumb brushed my cheek again, slower this time, the pad of it warm against my skin. Then he whispered, "Can I hold you? Really hold you?" I didn't even hesitate. I just nodded. He didn't pull me in roughly or suddenly. Instead, he shifted gradually, adjusting the pillows, tugging the sheet up a little, bringing our bodies together in this smooth, careful way that made it feel natural, like we'd done it 1,000 times without realizing it. I slid closer until my chest pressed against his, my leg brushing his, our breaths mixing. His arms wrapped around me fully now, not tentative like before, but confident. Sure, his chin rested lightly on top of my head, and I felt his breaths warm the hair near my temple. "This okay?" he murmured into my hair. "Yeah," I whispered. "More than okay." His hand found its way under the back of my shirt, fingertips lightly tracing the small of my back. Slow and thoughtful. Each touch sent a soft shiver up my spine. Not overwhelming, not rushed, just intimate. Like he was learning my body in a way that wasn't about desire alone, but about closeness. Something about that made my throat tighten. 6 years of being best friends. 6 years of closeness that always had boundaries we didn't cross. And now, suddenly, those boundaries didn't exist. Not in a reckless way, but in a way that felt like they weren't needed anymore. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked softly, my cheek pressed to his chest. "I was scared," he murmured. "I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't want to freak you out." "You didn't freak me out," he chuckled lightly. "Yeah, but I didn't know that then." I shifted enough to look up at him. His eyes were tracing my face in that way people do when they're trying to memorize something. He had this vulnerable half-smile, the one he only ever showed when he let his guard fully drop. "You know what scared me the most?" he whispered. "What?" He swallowed, thumb brushing the corner of my mouth. "That you'd pull away. That you'd tell me I made things weird. That you'd stop being my friend." My chest squeezed. "I wouldn't have." "Maybe I know that now," he murmured. "But for a long time, I really didn't." His voice cracked on the last word, just barely. I reached up and cupped his jaw with one hand, my thumb brushing where his stubble grew rougher near his cheek. He leaned into the touch like he'd been waiting for it without realizing it. "You didn't ruin anything," I said. "You didn't scare me away." His shoulders relaxed a bit, like the tension he'd been carrying secretly for months was finally loosening. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay." He kissed me again, slow, lingering, almost grateful. His lips were warm and soft, but the way he kissed me felt like he was letting himself want something for the first time. We broke apart gently, but didn't move far. His forehead rested against mine, our noses brushing. His thumb traced the curve of my jaw. "You feel good," he whispered, surprised by the honesty spilling out of him. "So do you." He laughed quietly, this shy, disbelieving sound, as if none of this aligned with who he thought he was supposed to be. But his arm stayed around me, firm and certain. We lay there like that for a long time, sprawled together in the heat and stillness of my bedroom, the kind of closeness that made every little detail stand out. The soft rise and fall of his chest, the warmth of his breath on my skin, the feeling of his thumb brushing slow circles into the back of my neck. At one point, he whispered, almost too soft to hear, "I keep thinking I'm dreaming." "You're not." "You sure?" I leaned in and kissed him once. Soft, real, unmistakable. "Pretty sure." He exhaled shakily, pulling me against him again with this quiet urgency that wasn't sexual, just intimacy he'd been starved for. I felt his hand slide from my back to my waist, resting there like it belonged. And with that, something unspoken settled between us. We weren't just two best friends sharing a bed anymore. We weren't pretending it was the heat, or habit, or accident. Something had shifted, permanently, undeniably, something neither of us wanted to rewind. Eventually, Evan murmured into my hair, barely audible, "What do we do when the sun comes up?" I didn't have an answer yet. But with his heartbeat under my ear and his arms around me like he wasn't letting go, I knew we'd figure it out together. Morning arrived like a slow, uncertain promise. Light leaked in through the blinds, painting thin, sleepy stripes across our faces. For a moment, I forgot about the world outside, about work, about responsibilities, about how two roommates and a mountain of laundry would react to whatever had happened between us. The only thing that existed was the steady pressure of Evan's arms wrapped around me and the sound of his slow breathing. He stirred first, the kind of half-awake movement that makes you think he's going to roll away and everything will go back to being normal. Instead, he buried his face in my hair and let out a contented sigh. "Morning," he mumbled without looking up. I smiled into the crook of his elbow. "Morning." We lay like that for a while, letting the quiet settle over us. The city beyond my window woke and carried on. People on their way to work, a bus coughing to life, someone in the building next door clanging around in the kitchen. But the apartment felt insulated, like the rest of the world had been put on pause. Eventually, reality crept in. The little things, the tick of my phone, the pile of dishes in the sink, started nudging their way into my head. I felt something heavy and electric at the base of my skull. The thought of how to explain this, how to be Evan's friend, and also whatever this was without strangling it with words. "Do you need to get to class?" I asked, half joking. He had a portfolio review today. He'd mentioned it the night before. He shifted, and for a second, a shadow crossed his face. Nervous. Worried. "Yeah, I should go. I don't want to miss it." "Do you want me to come with you?" I offered, surprising myself by how readily the suggestion left my mouth. He hesitated, then shook his head. "No. You should sleep. Or not. I don't know. He took a breath and sat up, looking suddenly much older with the morning light in his eyes. "I'll be back." "Okay." He hesitated at the doorway, hand on the frame, the air between us thick and ridiculous with unspoken things. "Hey," he said softly. "We'll talk about this later, yeah? Properly?" I reached up and nudged his shoulder with my hand. "Yeah, later." He smiled. The same crooked smile he'd had the night we'd rehearsed jokes and broken furniture. The one that folded his face into all the things I'd loved about him for years. Then he ducked out, leaving me alone with the warmth of the bed and the distant sound of city life. The minutes stretched into an hour. I lay there, mind ping-ponging between memories from the night before and wild scenarios of the future. I tried to be practical. Texts to send, groceries to buy, then found myself rereading the last text he'd sent before class. "We'll figure it out." When he came home that evening, he looked different, not in a superficial way, but like he'd been through something important and come back the other side. He dropped his backpack in the hallway and walked into the living room where I was hovering over a sad salad. I was trying very hard to pretend tasted good. "How'd it go?" I asked, pouring dressing over things I knew I didn't deserve. He shrugged, flopping onto the couch. "Good. Weird, kind of revealing. They asked a lot of questions about my concept, and I forgot to breathe for a full 10 minutes. But yeah, good." "Relieving?" I probed. "Relieving," he corrected, smiling. Then his expression sobered. Mike, about earlier." I set down my fork. "Yeah?" He shifted, sitting up. This time his eyes held mine without flinching. "I don't want to move fast if you don't want that. I also don't want to pretend like nothing happened. I just want to be honest with you. And with myself." My chest clenched with relief and something like joy. "Me too. Honest is good." He gave a short, almost embarrassed laugh. "So, honest now. I've been thinking about you like this for a while. I worried it would ruin us. I thought I could shove it down and stay friends. But last night I realized I don't want to pretend this isn't a thing anymore. I swallowed. I've thought about you, too. Not exactly the way you did, until recently. But yeah, I've thought about it. Evan's expression softened in a way that made me want to cry and laugh at the same time. He reached over and took my hand. His grip was simple, not showy, just grounding. We spent the rest of the evening talking. Not the big, terrifying future talk. Just the small, crucial ones. Boundaries, expectations. What we were and weren't ready for. We agreed to go slow. We agreed to be honest when it hurt. We agreed that if either of us felt like it was too much, we'd stop and talk about it. Like adults. At some point, the conversation stalled and gave way to easy silence. He leaned back, arm draped over the couch, and looked at me with that same curious, vulnerable expression he'd worn the first week we met. "Want to make this official?" he asked, grinning like an idiot. "What do you mean?" I played along. "Like, boyfriend official," he said, mock serious. "Do you want to be my boyfriend?" Heat rose to my cheeks. The word felt both ridiculous and thrilling. I thought for a second about all the ways this could go wrong. Exes, expectations, the delicate latticework of friendship we'd spent years building. But then I thought about the crease in his smile when he joked, about the way he'd rested against me in the night, about how comfortable and terrifying and right it all felt. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'll be your boyfriend." He whooped like a small child and kissed me hard right there on the couch, shocking me with the suddenness and happiness of it. It made something inside me unstoppered and free. After that, things didn't instantaneously become perfect. We still had to negotiate tiny things. How to explain this to friends. How to switch between being boyfriend and being best friend in public. The logistics of whose place we'd stay at on weekends. There were awkward moments, too. Old jokes that suddenly felt charged. Times when one of us would overthink a text and read too much into it. But we kept returning to the same thing that mattered. Honesty, conversation, patience. A week later, we told our closest friends. Reactions were mixed. Embarrassment from some, supportive cheering from others, and a couple of stunned silences that made both of us laugh nervously. But telling them made it real in a way that felt solid, like a new layer added to something that had already been strong. Work days and classes settled into a new rhythm. We started doing little things for each other that weren't dramatic but meant the world. Coffee left on a desk, a text midday that said, "Thinking of you," the way we fell asleep together half the week, and convinced ourselves that 2 laptops could indeed exist on one kitchen table. I found myself watching him sometimes, just watching him be himself. When he concentrated on a sketch, the tiny furrow between his brows, the way he hummed under his breath when a design worked out, how he'd make the most ridiculous face when he saw something gross on TV. Each little thing kept reminding me that what we had was real and tender and worth taking carefully. One night, months later, when the AC had been fixed and we sat together on the couch with a blanket over our legs, Evan nudged me. "Remember that night?" he asked, voice soft. "How could I forget?" I answered. He smiled, thumb rubbing small, unconscious circles into my hand. "I'm glad you didn't freak out." "I'm glad you reached for me," I said. He leaned over and kissed me, slow and steady. "Me too," he whispered into my mouth. Outside, the city breathed on. Inside, we had everything we needed. A messy, complicated, beautiful beginning no one would have expected. Least of all us. If someone had told me a few months earlier that Evan and I would end up together, not just in the nervous, late-night, what-if kind of way, but really together, I would have laughed, or panicked, or both. But the crazy thing about life is how quickly the unfamiliar becomes normal. How something you thought would be awkward or confusing becomes the most natural thing in the world. That's how it felt with Evan. A few weeks into our new whatever we were, then we had fallen into this rhythm. Not the honeymoon phase. Not that wild, overwhelming kind of infatuation that burns too bright and then fizzles out. Ours was quieter, steadier, like adjusting a dimmer switch and realizing the room had always been softly lit. You just hadn't noticed. But that didn't mean everything was simple. One Thursday night, I came home from work later than usual. Evan was already on the couch, laptop balanced on his knees, wearing that oversized hoodie he'd stolen from me the second week we started dating, pretending it was just comfortable, even though I knew he liked that it smelled like me. He looked up when I entered. His expression brightened, but then I saw something else flicker behind his eyes. Something tight, stressed. "Rough day?" he asked. I dropped my bag and sank onto the couch beside him. "You have no idea." Evan closed his laptop, concern pressing into the lines of his face. "Talk." And that's when something unexpected hit me. The familiarity of how he said that. The trust in it. The closeness. It wasn't a boyfriend tone. Or a best friend tone. It was both. I leaned my head back against the couch. Everything was just too much. Deadlines, clients, coworkers, I'm exhausted. He nodded slowly, then reached over and rested a hand on my thigh. "You know you don't have to pretend with me, right?" I turned to him. He wasn't smiling, wasn't making a joke to lighten the mood. He just looked at me, steady, grounded, warm. "Yeah," I whispered. "I know." He squeezed my thigh once. Good. But the tension in his eyes was still there, even if he was trying to hide it. "You okay?" I asked softly. He hesitated. Too long. Then he took a breath. "Can I be honest about something without it being weird?" My stomach clenched. Not out of fear, but instinct. "Always," he exhaled. "I've been scared you were pulling away." "Pulling away?" I repeated, stunned. "Evan, I'm not." "I know," he said quickly. "I know you're not. I know life is just life. But sometimes when you get stressed, you shut down. You go quiet. And I start," he rubbed the back of his neck, "I start wondering if it's me, if I'm doing something wrong." Hearing that hurt in a way that felt like a pressure behind my ribs. "Evan," I whispered, "no, God, no. You didn't do anything wrong." He looked down at his hands, picking at the sleeve of my hoodie. I like what we have. A lot. And I keep worrying I'll screw it up." I shifted closer, sliding my hand into his. "You're not screwing anything up." He lifted his eyes, and something vulnerable flashed there. Something so raw I felt it in my chest. So I pulled him in until our foreheads touched. "You know what I realized today?" I murmured. "What?" "That you're the one person I don't want to shut out when things get stressful. You're the one person who makes me feel grounded." Evan let out a shaky breath. "Yeah?" "Yeah." He leaned in, brushing his nose against mine. "Okay. That means a lot." And then he kissed me, soft, but with a kind of urgency underneath. Like the words we'd just shared had cracked something open. When we pulled apart, he whispered, "Want to lie down with me?" I nodded, and he pulled me onto the couch with him. Both of us squeezed together under the blanket in the smallest, most comfortable mess of limbs and warmth. My head rested on his chest, his hand tracing slow circles on my shoulder. We didn't talk for a long while. We didn't need to. His breathing, the steady rise and fall beneath me, was enough to settle everything that had been tangled inside me all day. After a few quiet minutes, he said softly, "You know, sometimes I still can't believe this is real." I smiled against him. "Me either. But I'm glad it is," he added, fingers playing with the edge of my shirt. "Me too." We stayed like that all night. No drama, no big conversation, just two people who'd fallen into something that felt deeper than either of us expected. And sometime, right as I was falling asleep, I felt him tighten his arm around me and murmur into my hair, "I don't ever want to lose this." "Or you." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because I already knew I felt the same way. By the time the month turned, we'd learned a few basic truths about loving someone who used to be your best friend. First, it takes time to remap a life that used to be built on a set of rules. Casual jokes, an easy teasing rhythm, the comfortable silence of being two people who had known each other forever. That map doesn't erase itself overnight. You fold it into something bigger. You add new routes. You agree on where the dangerous cliffs are and who should lead when you're both exhausted. Second, honesty is the only thing that makes this survivable. Not performative honesty, the kind that looks good on a text, but Messy, midnight honesty when one of you is drunk on fear and the other is bleary with worry. We argued. We apologized. We said dumb things and then explained them later with no drama because we'd decided previously that secrecy was the real enemy. It helped. Third, little things become huge. The way he folded my t-shirts after laundry. The way he'd text me a terrible pun at 3 a.m. when I had a deadline. The way he learned my coffee order and made it just right on Saturdays. Those small, habitual tendernesses built a life faster than the romance did. And finally, this is probably the biggest one. We found that wanting to be with someone and knowing how to actually be with them are two very different skills. We were both good at wanting. Learning to be present, to listen, to give space, to hold when needed, that took longer. But when you're the kind of people who already know each other's worst jokes, and the exact moment to say, it's okay, practice matters. There were awkward social moments. We had to tell his parents first, more nerve-wracking than any exam, shooting my hand beneath the table and squeezing until Evan laughed under his breath. They were weird for a minute, then delighted, then teasing, then completely normal, which felt like the best possible outcome. Friends were different. Some of them joked about it for a while. Some of them gave us the side eye and then quietly texted to check in. The ones who mattered celebrated. Work and life brought in their usual noise. Late nights, missed calls, the treadmill of bills. But there was a steadiness now, this knowledge that a soft body waited at home down the hall who knew the code for your apartment and the playlist that won't ruin your mood. You can weather ordinary life when you know you're not alone. There were nights when I still couldn't believe it. Like when we'd stumble into bed laughing about something stupid, and then we'd find our hands, like magnets remembering each other's places. There were nights when it was terrifying, when jealousy flared over petty things and we had to talk 2 hours into the night until the thing that triggered it felt small again. Those nights were the real tests. We didn't always pass gracefully. Sometimes we passed with apologies and late-night cereal and terrible movies on the couch to distract ourselves until the heat of the fight cooled. And there were the tender wounds, my fear when he wanted to move for a job across the city for a show, his fear when my mother got sick and I was quiet for days. In those moments, I learned how to be his steady. He learned how to be mine. We were each other's fallback plan and first call, which is a phrase that feels dramatic in print but felt sacred at 2 a.m. when one of us couldn't sleep. One evening, about 9 months after that first night in the hot apartment, Evan and I took a walk down by the river. The city lights blurred into long ribbons on the water. We fell into the comfortable silence that had become ours. I felt his hand find mine, those fingers lacing in with a familiarity that was both surprising and expected. "You remember that stupid fan?" he asked suddenly, nodding to the memory of our original excuse to share the bed. "How could I forget?" I laughed. "I still can't believe it actually led to this." He squeezed my hand. "I still can't believe you let me stay. I didn't think you'd quit trying until I physically threw you out," I teased. He nudged my shoulder with his elbow. "Hey, I'm persistent." We walked a little more, and he stopped. He turned to me with that crooked smile that made me melt 1,000 tiny times. I knew it so well that it felt like home. "I'm glad," he said simply. "I'm glad I reached." I felt everything fold in on itself in the best way. Memory and present and a future that seemed quieter now because the loud panic had passed. "Me too," I said. "I'm glad you did." He leaned in and kissed me there on the riverbank, soft and certain. When he pulled back, we both broke into a grin, ridiculous and giddy like teenagers. "So," he said, taking my face in his hands, "same time tomorrow?" "Same time every day," I answered. We built our life out of ordinary days and small promises. We learned language for our fears, ways to apologize that actually changed things, and habits that kept us gentle. We bought a bigger fan for the apartment. We got a plant that almost always died but somehow thrived under Evan's care. We argued about how to fold socks. We supported each other when family stuff got dicey. We proved, step by step, that two people who started as friends could become something more without losing what made them good. Sometimes people asked if things ever felt odd, like were we missing the easy comforts of being just friends? Rarely. Mostly, we discovered we'd only moved forward. Instead of losing what we had, we'd layered something richer on top. Honesty, desire, and a kind of companionship that bore more weight. In the end, it wasn't the grand declarations that mattered. It was the small, deliberate touch at midnight, the whispered, "I'm here," when the world got loud. The knowing glance across a crowded room. The easy laughter and the promise to always be truthful even when the truth hurt. We still laugh about that night. The fan, the heat, the way something simple turned our world upside down. It's one of those stories we tell because it's unbelievable and also because it's true. It was messy and imperfect and exactly what we needed. When people ask me now, years later, if I'd changed the timing, if I'd want to have known sooner or saved myself from the months of confusing doubt, I always answer the same way. No, I say, I wouldn't change a thing, because we grew into this. We learned to want the right way. We learned to be brave enough to reach. And sometimes, when I wake up to his hand wrapped around my waist, his breath on the back of my neck, and the fan humming softly nearby, I still remember that first hesitant touch and feel grateful. Grateful that he reached. Grateful that I didn't run.